In this lecture, you'll learn how to implement a C# script in Unity. So let's go do that. The first time you open up Unity Hub, you won't have any projects in your projects list here, and we can fix that by creating a new project. Before we do that, I want to show you that we can click the Preferences gear, and we can pick a default location for where all our projects get put. So you might want to do that, decide where you want to save all your Unity projects, and then set the default location here in Preferences. Once you've done that, we can create a new project by clicking this blue New Project button in the upper right. And up here, there's a pick list of Unity editors. So we can decide which Unity editor version we're going to use to create our project. You may only have one if you've only installed one version of Unity, but I have multiple versions, so you just pick whichever one you want. I will say that sometimes you'll start up it with learning templates selected here on the left. And this editor version doesn't have learning templates, but more recent versions do. So if you end up here in the learning templates, you should select either all templates or core and pick 2D core. All the games that we create and all the courses in the specialization will be 2D games, so we'll always create a 2D Unity project. Over here on the bottom right, we should name our project something other than my project. So I'm going to name this one First Unity Script. And even though we set a default location over in Preferences, you can scroll down and change where you save this particular project if you don't want it to be in the default location. Then you click the blue Create Project button, and after some period of time that's dependent on how powerful your computer is, you'll get the Unity editor opened up. By default, the Unity editor doesn't look like this. The windows are in different places and so on. But the appendix in the book that I gave you in the week 1 reading talks about how you can get this layout if you want to use it. This is my preferred layout, so you'll always see me providing examples to you using this layout. But if you want to use some other layout, by all means go ahead and do so. We're going to talk about the Unity editor a lot in a couple of weeks. For right now, we're just going to focus on writing our first Unity script. The first thing I always do with a new Unity project is you'll notice that our scene is called Sample Scene, and I never like it to be called Sample Scene. So I'm going to come over here into the project window and I'll expand scenes because I know that's where the sample scene is, and I'm going to rename this. So I can left click this to rename it, and I like to call this Scene 0. You could certainly call it Gameplay or something else if you wanted to, but I typically call my scene, my single scene in this simple game, Scene 0. I've picked a new name and I hit enter, and it asks if I want to reload, and I do, so I reloaded the scene. We still don't have a script written, so I'm going to add a new folder within Assets. So I right-clicked Assets, and I'm going to say Create Folder, and I'll call my folder Scripts. I've certainly had students at UCCS and learners on Coursera who don't believe in folders, so you want to put everything just under Assets. That works fine if you have 4 or 5 assets, but it doesn't work for real games where you have hundreds or thousands of assets. So I always use folders to organize my game assets because that's a good habit to be in when we actually build games. I'm going to now right-click on the Scripts folder and say Create C# Script. And I'm going to change the name of this. I haven't clicked away from this or anything. You can see I can rename it because it's highlighted in blue. I'm going to call it Print Message. Now, before I actually open the script, I want to show you, first of all, it's reloading script assemblies, and that's fine. I want to show you that you can change whatever integrated development environment you're using for when you open up your C# scripts. Under Edit, Preferences, I can pick External Tools here on the left, and you can see that my external script editor is set to Visual Studio 2022. And that's what you want yours to be set to as well. If you have multiple versions of Visual Studio installed, as you can see I have 2019 on this machine as well, you could pick that instead if you wanted, or you could browse to an executable if you like some other C# editor. But of course we're using Visual Studio 2022 in all the courses in the specialization, so that's what you should set it to. Okay, to open the script, I just double click it, and now Visual Studio opens up. As you can see, this does not look the same as our program.cs file we got when we created a console app. We have a public class here called printMessage that does something called inheriting from monobehavior, and we'll talk about that when we get to inheritance. We don't have a main method. Instead, we have a start method and an update method that are provided by default in this template. Let me come up here to summary and just say prints a message, because I always feel compelled to add my documentation comments. And now let's talk about the start and update methods. So the start method is called, strictly speaking, when the script is activated. For our purposes, in all the courses throughout the specialization, for almost all of our scripts, what we're going to do is we're going to attach the script to a game object, an object that is in our scene. And what that really means is the start method will get called when the game object the script is attached to gets added to the scene. In general, you can just think of the start script as something that will get executed for the game object it's attached to whenever we enter the scene that has that game object, or essentially when we start playing that scene. So we use this to initialize, to do things that we only want to do once, and the start method is the most common place that we'll do that. The update method, as the comment says, is called once per frame. And by the way, this format with documentation comments included in the script that the Unity editor generated for us, it only looks that way if you in fact change the default script template, as I talk about in chapter 2 of the book that I gave you. I talk about where you go to change this and how you should change it. Otherwise, they're not documentation comments, they're just standard line comments above the methods. So update is called once per frame, and that's pretty self-explanatory. If your game is running at a grindingly slow 3 frames per second, the update method gets called 3 times per second. If your game is running at a screamingly fast 60 frames per second, then update gets called 60 frames a second. So whatever your frame rate is, update gets called on every frame. We actually don't need the update method for our first Unity script, so I'm going to highlight and delete it. We do want to do something once, and we want to print a message. And you might really feel compelled to say console.writeLine, and that will not work. It will compile, but you won't get any output when you run the game. The way we get output when we run the game in our Unity scripts is we use either debug.log or we use print. One of those two. I'm going to fairly consistently use debug.log, but both of them work fine. And what we do is, in here we provide something that we want to output to the console window in the Unity editor, which we'll go back and look at soon. So I'll just print a supportive message like, "Hi noob." Get rid of that extra blank line because I don't need it and don't want it. And really importantly, we need to make sure we save this script before we expect it to work properly when we run the game. I typically will actually just build to make sure I can catch any compilation errors here. And this is just Visual Studio. So you can press F6 or you can come up here and select Build Solution. Either way works fine. Down on the bottom, the build succeeded. So we're actually all done here in the C# script. When we come back to the editor though, after it's done reloading the script assemblies, if I run my game, and I can run my game by clicking this arrow here, this play button at the top, I can also use Control P, and once the buttons turn blue, well, once the play button turns blue, our game is running. Here's where we'd expect to see output, but we don't, and we're sad. So remember I said we almost always will attach the script to a game object, but I haven't done that yet. As it turns out, in this default scene, we have one game object in the scene. It's the main camera. So I want to attach my print message script to the main camera. There are a variety of ways to do that, but I've found the easiest way to do it is to drag the script onto the camera. And now I've added it to the camera. I'm going to save the scene. I'm just using Control S to do that. And now when I run the game again using Control P hotkey, you can see down here in the console window that it actually says Hi Noob. Now it may be the case that you've done everything like I just showed you and you're not seeing a message. If that happens for you, make sure you click this chat bubble button here. I've just turned off output, so I will turn off the magnifier again and stop running the game. And if I run the game again, if you look down in the console window, you'll see nothing is output. So that is a debugging thing for you to do. We can see that something was output because this has a little 1 inside there, but we didn't get to see it. So make sure that that is the lighter color, which means on, rather than the darker color, which means off, to make sure you see your output. So there you go. We've written our first Unity script. To recap, in this lecture you learned how to use Visual Studio to implement a C# Unity script, and you also learned that we need to attach that script to a game object in our scene to actually make the script execute when we run our game.